Hi everybody, my name is Max Michon with Ready Set Train. In today's video, we're going to go over an exercise we call the Look at That exercise. It's a counter conditioning exercise that will hopefully get your dog used to all sorts of exciting, scary, stressful things like other dogs, people, bikes, skateboards. The goal of this exercise is to teach your dog how to be calm around those triggers. We call it the Look at That exercise because whatever our dogs are looking at, that's what they're thinking about. So if your dog is looking at another person, if they're looking at another dog, chances are they're thinking about that other dog or that person. So our goal is to figure out what's our dog's threshold. So a threshold is, I'd say, think about an imaginary line. Everything below this imaginary line is good, calm thinking behavior for our dogs. They're able to pay attention, listen, respond to their marker. Everything above this imaginary line, we start to get into reactivity or bad behavior. So our goal with this exercise is to expose our dogs to the triggers well below threshold. We want them to get used to these dogs, people, whatever the trigger is, when they're displaying good behaviors. So there's a couple of things that we're going to need your dog to know before we start the Look at That exercise. The first is you need to condition a marker for your dog. If you haven't done that, you can watch our video on how to condition a marker. We're going to use a clicker. Click, give the dog a treat. For the Look at That exercise, we're trying to let our dogs look at something, mark, and then reward calm behavior. Ideally, our dog is responding to the marker. When they hear that marker, they are disengaging. They're looking back at us. So Winslow right now is not responding to the marker. He is possibly close to going over threshold. So what we would want to do is change something, move farther away from the thing that he is focused on or looking at. We don't want to stay at this point for very long if our dog isn't able to disengage when we do our marker. So again, ideally, your dog hears the marker, they disengage from the thing that they're looking at, and they come back to you. If we see that pattern, then we know that the dog is below threshold. We know that we're hopefully capturing good behavior, good emotions. The goal of the Look at That exercise is to change the association with the thing that your dog is looking at. So I didn't like other dogs, but now every time I look at another dog, I get a treat. I'm getting a hot dog. I'm getting something good. We're trying to capture calm behavior. So if our dogs are acting calm in relation to the other dog, the person, the skateboard, whatever the trigger is for your dog, and we reward calm behavior, they're going to be more likely to display that behavior in the future. And then finally, as you can see Winslow's starting to do, I started by rewarding him for looking at the thing, and now he's starting to check in with me. So hopefully, eventually, the thing your dog is looking at becomes a cue for your dog to then check back in. This takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of practice. And the most important thing is to figure out what is your dog's threshold. If you are getting close to threshold, if you are over threshold, your dog is not going to learn how to be calm, and they're not going to desensitize. We have to be at a level the dog can do good behavior. So what we're going to do now and cut and come back, we're just going to wait for something exciting to happen here in the park. And when Winslow starts to look at those things, we're going to do our counter conditioning Look at That exercise. So for the Look at That, we're waiting for the dog to look at the trigger. We're clicking. And then we are looking to see if the dog is disengaging and responding to that mark. We want their head kind of snapping back. So we want them to look back right away. If they don't, if they're starting to, I call it get sticky head, if their head is getting stuck on the trigger, that means that we're getting over threshold. And we would need to break their focus, move a little bit farther away, hopefully have changed something. So we wait for the dog to look back. Click. They look back at us. Make sure that your mechanics are good. We don't want to be moving our hand out to give the dog the treat before the mark. The marker is giving us information. Is the dog responding to that click? If I have my hand out in front of Winslow's face while I've got treats in it, he's going to look back at me, but I want to see, does he respond to that mark? Only letting him look right now for a couple of seconds, maybe 2 to 3. If he's doing better, I will start to let him look for longer periods of time, or if he starts to do the automatic check-in like he just did right there, those are good signs. That means that we could start to let the dog engage more. If the dog starts to not care, if they start to just sit there and stare at you, they're going to be ignoring the trigger. That means that we could start to get closer. The trigger could become more intense. We could push this a little bit. The end goal is that your dog learns to not care. Most of the time, what we want our dogs to do in relation to a trigger is nothing. We don't want them to react to it. We don't want them to care about it. Just be calm. We can also think about our reinforcement placement. So if I need to get a couple more treats in my hand, or if I just think my dog is getting a little too amped up, a lot of times what I will do is do a little treat scatter on the ground, get them to engage with the environment. If they're using their nose, if they're sniffing, that is going to help calm down too. It also gives them a little bit of a break from that trigger. So you can do that periodically. Place those treats on the floor, the environment, in the grass, and then that will help your dog disengage, especially if that trigger is getting a little bit more excited. So again, to summarize, we let the dog look over at the trigger, we mark while they're watching, and we see if they disengage. But we want, again, that head kind of snapping away. When we have a lot of practice with these triggers, when we start to notice the dog doesn't care, we could start to work on some focus and attention. So capturing eye contact while the dog is looking at you, saying their name, if you have a watch cue, cueing something like that, some attention and some focus. It's important to eventually move into those exercises too. But first, we are just trying to get the dog to look calmly at these triggers and to record that behavior. So some variables to consider with this exercise. 3 things that I think about are distance, intensity, time. So distance is easy. It's the closer the dog is to the trigger, the harder it's going to be for them to be calm, the harder it's going to be for them to do this exercise. If they're 5 feet away from another dog, it's going to be harder than if they're 100 feet away. So we want to start these exercises with as much distance as we can. It's easy to get closer. It's harder to move your dog farther away after they have a reaction. The other big variable that affects our dogs a lot is intensity. So if we have a very calm dog walking back down the path here, that's going to be a lot easier for Winslow than if that dog is barking and lunging. So intensity makes a big difference. If that is fast or slow, loud or quiet, we want to think about that. And if we think that trigger is more intense, we should probably add some distance or not let our dog look for a very long period of time. The final aspect is time. So the longer our dogs stare at something, the more likely it is at first for them to get themselves worked up or to go over threshold. So at first, we really don't want to let them focus for very long, especially if we're noticing more amped up behavior. We want to note that and say, okay, we're going to move back to a distance or a threshold where they can be more calm. So I usually start with anywhere 3 to 5 seconds of the dog looking over, and anything beyond that, I am marking or I'm getting the dog to disengage. When I see that they're disengaging on their own a lot, when they're being calm, now I'll start to let them look for longer periods. And it's good to let our dog watch these things because they get lots of information about the trigger. How does it move? What does it do? And if we're doing this right, that's what's going to desensitize them to said trigger. If there is something called trigger stacking that will happen while you do this exercise. So trigger stacking is, here's our dog's threshold. The more triggers that are happening in the environment at the same time, the more likely we are to have to stack on top of each other. And that stress, excitement, that reactivity will build up in our dog's system. So what we have to be aware of is, okay, there's one dog walking down the path. It's one thing, but now there's another dog barking over here. There's a person coming towards us. The more triggers that are happening, the harder it's going to be for your dog to be. And you have to really be aware of everything that's happening in here. So everything that's going on around, in front of, behind, and be willing to move around. Make things easier for your dog if we notice that there's a lot of triggers stacking up on top of themselves at any moment in time. So you have to be aware of those variables: distance, duration, intensity. And then think about trigger stacking. Think about what is happening around my dog. And if you're keeping all of that in mind, your dog's going to be a lot more successful. If your dog does start to react, the best thing to do is to try to get them out of that situation. So try to walk away, try to break their focus, try to just get them to a point where they are no longer locked on or focusing on the thing they were reacting to. And then we want to keep them at that new distance until they calm down. We want to get them kind of back close to neutral, to zero. If they are still amped up, if they're still hypervigilant, if they're looking all over the place, that's not going to be good. We're going to set them up to react or to fail when all of a sudden a trigger shows up. So if there's a reaction, get your dog out of the situation. And that might mean going back to the car. That might mean going in the house for a little. And that's okay. We want to try to make sure that we're not constantly causing these reactions. If they're happening, we need to reevaluate how we're setting up the situation and make it easier for our dogs. So it's going to happen. There's going to be a reaction every now and then. That's not a big deal. But we don't want that to be outweighing all of the good work we're doing with capturing calm behavior. So think about, if your dog's having reactions consistently, how can we change the situation? Get your dog out of the situation, walk away, go behind a barrier, go in the house, go back to the car, and reset. And then you could start again if you notice that they calm down. Okay, for summary, we think with a look at that exercise, it's a good idea to just go sit somewhere with your dog and watch the world go by. So let them see other dogs, let them see people, let them see skateboards, and do that at a level where they can just be calm and relaxed. Figure out a starting point where you and your dog can get exposed to things. If your dog is too stimulated in the park, go sit in your car, go sit in a parking lot, go very far away from people. Don't worry about the quantity. You don't need your dog to see 100 people and they reacted to 90 of them. You want your dog to have seen 5 people today and we had a really good interaction. They were calm, they were relaxed, they did the behaviors we wanted them to do. So keep that in the back of your mind. Exposure is important, but the right kind of exposure is what we want. So in summary, for the look at that exercise, it's just a counter conditioning. We let our dog notice the trigger. We mark while they're looking at that trigger. And we try to find a point where the dog is calmly paying attention. They're below threshold. So hopefully this helps you and your dog be able to start to get exposure to other triggers, things that make them excited, things that make them nervous or afraid, things that they react to. It will work for any of those types of situations. If you are looking for more training videos, we have a whole series we call our Basic Behavior Series, where we teach your dog some foundation exercises like marker, sit, down, come when called. You can check those out. We keep building our YouTube channel videos, so if they're, make sure you subscribe and you can get updated when we post new videos. We try to do that once a month. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and you can check out our website, www.readysettraindogs.com. We are a fully active training business, so if you need private training, group classes, dog walking, we offer all of those things in the Tweedle area. So be sure to reach out to us at 419-283-6149, info.readysettrain@gmail.com if you would like to schedule any of those services. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Happy training.